to break down this more, we are joined in studio by Benjamin Anthony, CEO of the Miriam Institute. Always good to have you in studio.
Thanks for having me.
We're seeing this situation with the Houthis escalate on a daily basis, now claiming 3 lives. We've also seen Iran's other proxies in some arenas drawn back, Syria and Iraq, given direct orders to stop targeting Americans because they do not want an escalation. Why rein in some of their groups but give the others free rein?
Well, I think, first of all, what's going on with the Houthis is a continuing problem, a continuing issue, and despite the international coalition to push them back, it's not been successful. As you said, 3 people have been killed. There was the firing of an anti-ship ballistic missile at that vessel in the Gulf of Aden. So we're seeing that continue. I don't know what will be the outcome there. It's very interesting. There's absolutely no international condemnation against pushing back the Houthis, but there's massive international condemnation against Israel pushing back against Hamas, obviously, something that we've become accustomed to. In terms of Iran's proxies writ large, I actually think that Israel needs to have a little bit of real introspection. We have traded on the idea for many, many years that our intelligence is the best in the world, that our operatives overseas are the best in the world. And while there's certainly wonderful individuals, brave individuals, dedicated individuals and teams, it looks right now, as an Israeli sitting in Israel, that Iran is having the loudest, not the last, but the loudest laugh. We've seen their proxies become very potent in southern Lebanon by way of Hezbollah. Of course, we saw what Hamas did to us on October the 7th and how Hamas is still able to torment us by way of holding on to the hostages. Has Iran shown itself to have more of a step in front of Israel than Israel in front of Iran? I would say it probably has lately, and I think that needs to be adjusted. The first thing that we need to do is start attacking these proxies, hitting them, putting them on the back foot. That includes obviously what we're doing in the Gaza Strip, but certainly a more determined effort and, I believe, a military campaign in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. Not a diplomatic resolution. There's already a diplomatic resolution. It's been ignored. What we need is a serious military campaign to downgrade, if not to destroy, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
That's going to be a major challenge. The United States is pushing everything they can to avoid exactly that outcome. At this point, they're even threatening, they're sending signals into the various press outlets that they're going to condition military aid to Israel on how it fights in Gaza, and they want to keep Israel on a short leash and avoid escalation in Lebanon. How can we square these 2 strategic insults, these 2 strategic interests? 1, dealing with a direct threat on Israel's border, but 2, maintaining an arms supply from the United States?
So, yeah, first of all, there is an expose that expresses that the Biden administration may start to condition the use of American-made and sold munitions, specifically in any incursion into the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. Firstly, of course, those are only statements, there are only ideas, there are only rumors at this time. It's not being done. If it is to be done, it would be largely unprecedented. And with regard to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, look, we have to realize and understand the Americans will not have to live directly, as wonderful as they may be in support of the state of Israel, as vital to Israeli interests as America may well be and American support may be. The Americans will not have to live with the outcome of a Hezbollah that is not defanged. The reality is that Hezbollah has sought for many years to undertake a similar invasion into northern Israel, as we saw Hamas do in southern Israel, to take hold of towns, to murder civilians, and to kidnap civilians. What happened on October 7th was awful beyond words. What Hezbollah has the ability to do really goes beyond that by orders of magnitude. It's very clear that if Israelis are to be able to live in this country and to live in an atmosphere of peace, security, and safety in this country, we are going to have to act militarily in a very determined fashion, in a sustained fashion, against Hezbollah. Our enemies are not deterred, and our enemies seem to be able to begin and halt hostilities at their whims and wills. It's time that we understood that, and that we turn the tables, and that we move into southern Lebanon with determination at a time of our choosing and of our initiation.
We say at a time of our choosing, a time of our initiation, but the big question is, how prepared is Israel for such a war? For decades, Israel has decreased the size of its military, relying on technology, relying on this intelligence idea that you presented as flawed before. Given that, we've also seen no investment in the shelters in the north. We've had our own reporters go up there and say that only a small percentage are ready to withstand the bombardment that Hezbollah can release on Israel. Is Israel ready to get into this fight?
So I think let's separate Israel from the IDF for a moment. In terms of the passive defense that we have, if you like, or even some might say the active defense, but I call it passive defense. So those are the shelters. Yes, we do need to have a situation where the shelters are increased, more ready, more accessible to the civilians in the north. But let's not forget, the civilians are not there. The civilians, the citizens of Israel, have been moved south. They're basically refugees in their own country since the events of October the 7th. And therefore, I think that given the absence of those civilians, now would be a very good time, in light of what you said about the lack of shelters, lack of investment in that passive defense system that we have there. I think now would be the moment to move against Hezbollah. Our civilians cannot be expected to move back to where they were, 80,000 of them in number, if they face the threat of Hezbollah moving into Israeli territory in the north. And it's a very, very real threat. In terms of active defense, we saw that the Iron Dome was effective against about 10 of the 30 rockets that were fired from Hezbollah, by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon onto Kiryat Shmona. So that's likely to be overwhelmed as well. In terms of preparedness of the military, I think the military is more prepared than ever before. We are there arrayed across the border, not only with Lebanon, but also with Syria. And we also have, as a consequence of our activities in the Gaza Strip, a very real battle-hardened group of soldiers who had not seen war and combat for many, many years until the events following October 7th, until this current war. I think that savviness, that experience, and that willingness to fight and win, that absolutely should be deployed against Hezbollah. I'd rather that than we wait until we lack that experience once again, and then we are attacked first by Hezbollah, which they surely will do, and then we have to respond. Let's learn the lessons now while we have the opportunity to do so, and let's implement those to our benefit and our safety.
We know that Israel has truly incredible strike capacity, but the question is, what happens when it comes time to sustain a campaign in the north, particularly with the American administration that seems to want to rein Israel in? If the American administration says they will not resupply Israel's munitions, what does that mean?
Well, again, the Americans are not saying right now that they will not resupply Israel's munitions. What they're saying is, with a specific reference to a potential military action, which I would be very supportive of in Rafah, that they may condition the use of those munitions in that particular scenario. I don't think that they're saying that about the opportunities that Israel has to operate in southern Lebanon. In fact, there was an expose in the Washington Post that expressed that there have been more than 100 different arms sales that have been approved since October the 7th without requiring congressional approval, because each of them has been carefully calibrated to be below the threshold that does require congressional approval. So the flow of arms is continuing, but this speaks to a much larger, more strategic issue. That issue is, in my view, the state of Israel must, and I've said this for many years, it must wean itself off this dependency upon the United States of America for munitions, diplomatic support, and so forth. We can still maintain a wonderful friendship, maintain and protect the strategic importance of our closeness to the United States of America, but we cannot be dependent upon it, because there are real changes taking place among the political echelons in America, incidentally on both sides of the aisle right now, in a much more pronounced fashion on the left of the political aisle. There's no question about that. But we don't know what that will look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There's also a growing isolationist camp over on the right of the political aisle. Hopefully that's going to get squashed, but we don't know. Given all of that, Israel really needs to become much more self-sufficient.
But who can Israel rely on to give it the raw materials it needs to build those factories? We don't have any natural resources here to speak of. When we're talking about self-sufficiency, Israel will still be reliant on just every basic material need from other people. So who can it rely on if not the United States?
Relies on itself. There's no issue with buying and purchasing raw materials and utilizing those for that which we want to utilize them. I think that Israel needs to diversify itself away from the United States, but diversify itself away from them toward itself. I don't think that the issue of natural resources will prove to be in any way inhibitive to Israel's ambitions if it sets that ambition as a true strategic goal. The question is it capable of doing that? Are we capable of doing that? This issue of dependency upon American munitions and diplomatic support, it's been an issue for many years. It's been an issue for a long time, and there's never been a strategic pivot towards resolving that issue. I actually believe that greater self-sufficiency here in Israel will bring about an even greater, warmer friendship and affiliation and association and partnership with the United States of America. Incidentally, America is not the only place where we have this issue. We saw that Benny Gantz, a minister in the war cabinet who went trundling off to the United Kingdom and to the United States before then, independent or even in violation of the wishes of the Prime Minister of the States of Israel, in no small part went to the United Kingdom to push back against this notion that the UK would stop supplying and selling arms to the States of Israel. We don't know how those talks went. I don't think they were particularly fruitful, but America is not the only country where Israel is constantly asking for the continuation of sales. One last point. Business is business and the dollar is the dollar, and these arms manufacturers, they will want those arms sold to the highest purchaser, and our neighborhood being what it is, Israel is a very reliable customer.
That does come with a certain follow-up question. We've seen Israel being criticized heavily and in some cases diplomatically abandoned just in the course of this war by many countries around the world, and certainly the ones that have cut off contact have been largely utterly irrelevant micronations that Israel hasn't relied on. But if Israel does decide to say to the world at large in the United States, well, we're going to go at it on our own and we can't rely on you, is that not going to expand into something that Israel cannot deal with?
The diplomatic support for Israel is something that is a tricky subject to talk about. I think that the members of the American Jewish community expect unfettered support from their elected officials when it comes to the State of Israel, particularly on the international stage. But look, Kamala Harris came out with an appalling statement while Benny Gantz was on his way to the United States. Again, I have to tell you, I don't think Benny Gantz had any business traveling to the United States, but there we are. But she expressed that there's a humanitarian catastrophe taking place inside the Gaza Strip, which is completely false. And that wording has now been forged into the drafting of a resolution with the approval of the United States of America, that the Americans were trying to push away and had actually vetoed twice, a resolution of the UN Security Council that is now going to include that language from Vice President Kamala Harris. It's unforgivable. And that's why when the Vice President makes such an appalling statement such as that, it cannot simply be swept away as speaking at the microphone at the moment and it was a misstatement, because it's now going to be most likely ratified into the public record by way of this United Nations resolution. And there's form for this. We saw the same thing happen. It's rather reminiscent of Barack Obama instructing the Americans to abstain to Resolution 2334 just when he was ending his administration, which really sanctioned very severely the State of Israel for building communities in Judea and Samaria.
Challenges all around with very little correct moves to make. Benjamin, thank you so much for breaking down the major threat facing Israel in many arenas, not just military, but also international.
My pleasure.